Thank you, Professor Bhagwati and the Dean, for having invited me to associate with this very important occasion at the Columbia University, where the Deepak and Neera Raj Center is today being set up on the Indian economy. Thank you very much for a very gracious act of and concern for the Indian economy that this Center of Scholarship is being set up. Let me just start by carrying the debate that Professor Bhagwati just mentioned. On the second question first, I think the professor is right because we in India have had a track record of having great opportunities and then having squandered them. And therefore a concern whether the situation that exists today could be utilized or not is a legitimate concern. You mentioned on the previous occasion, and since you've been kind enough to have invited me almost for the fourth time in the last 2 to 3 years at Columbia. I came here first as the leader of opposition. I think in the last 10 years, which became in many sense a wasted period, a thought process that prevailed was not recognizing the difference that India in this age and era, 2015, is significantly different from the India 1971. In 1971, you could come out with a decade which was almost a wasted decade, and then sustain yourself politically on the strength of slogans because popular expectations were not so high. But as you've yourself in your writings used the phrase about the revolution of rising expectations in India, that's a great challenge that we face. And therefore, one of the problems in the last 10 years was to just concentrate on redistribution of the existing resource rather than concentrate on productivity and increasing growth itself. That was impacted because your old friend, as you call him, got overpowered by somebody who thought that the 1971 experience in the last decade could have been repeated. But unfortunately, it was not. I think what's happening today is something entirely different. The Prime Minister's visit last week to the United States, as his visits elsewhere in the world have produced, I think there are very significant factors which emerge. It's not merely the charisma of his personality. Of course, that's a great asset for us. His leadership and his decision-making ability is a very important asset for us. What's happening at home, I think, is equally important. And added to it is also the power and the impact of the Indian diaspora. And I think these three factors are collectively, globally, creating this India impact world over. And that's happening at a very challenging time. For us, the newest normal now is to live in turbulence and volatility. Now, this could be created by a series of actions. It could be because of the interest rates decision in the United States. It could be on account of what's happening in China or a crisis that takes place in Europe. Earlier, we've seen that some of these global crises used to come periodically, almost once in a decade. But now we've entered a phase where I think we are almost seeing them on a regular basis. And the strength of an emerging economy and the challenges to it particularly will have to have due regard and keep in mind that it is in this period of volatility and turmoil that you have to survive. Now, just 2 years ago, India was being rated as a part of the fragile five. An often repeated comment was that will the I in BRICS get knocked off? And it was quite disheartening and disappointing for us in India, as anybody who would be of concern, who would have concerns with India, to see these kinds of observations taking away. And we could almost see an opportunity being squandered. 16, 17 months later, there are very significant changes taken place. There will be comments, and I quite willingly, in the spirit of dissent, democracy, the freedom of comment, well, how fast the whole change and the reform process can be. But I think what's most important is what steps are being taken. Is there consistency in the direction of those steps being taken? And are we taking each one of those steps in the right direction? Or is it some contrarian signals that we are going to send out and therefore signal to the rest of the world that again it's going to be the same disappointment that comes when you had the opportunities in front of you and you squandered them? There are many factors globally which are impacting on us. Global slowdown is an important external factor which is impacting partly on our investments. It's impacting significantly on our exports. What happened in China impacted on our currency. It impacted on the stock markets. But then we are a unique economy where there are many advantages which have also taken place. We are not a part of the Chinese supply chain. And therefore, in that sense, we remain slightly disconnected with what's happening there. And what's happening to the oil prices, the commodity prices, resulting in transfer of wealth from the producing nations to the consuming nations, I think is significantly impacting on us. And I'll just, during the course of the discussion just now, indicate that how we've utilized each one of these opportunities. Just on the macroeconomics today, last year we grew by about 7.3%. Our internal estimates are that this year we could do a shade better than that. Our inflation is broadly under control. The central bank slowly but steadily has in the last 16 months brought down the repo rate by almost 125 basis points while keeping the inflation broadly under control. Our current account deficit is about 1.2% thanks to the oil prices. Fiscal deficit is under control. Foreign exchange reserves are not a cause for worry at all. Having achieved these fundamentals and a correct fiscal prudence, we are targeting to reach over the next 2 to 2.5 years the 3% fiscal deficit figure, and I think we are well on track to achieve that. The direction the present government has followed, learning from our past experiences, also the mistakes of the past, has been very clear. I think the first important decision, which was a low-hanging fruit, was to open out most sectors of the economy. I think India has accepted now the fact that international investment is a great additionality of resource. And particularly in the last 2 years, where domestic investment has been somewhat slow, we've had to scale up public investment and the foreign direct investment. The Financial Times recently indicated that India was probably the prime destination of foreign direct investment in greenfield projects itself. I concede we had a fairly terrible reputation in matters of ease of doing business, and that has been the Prime Minister's key emphasis, particularly on the quality of governance itself. As I speak to you now, I can say comfortably, a change in the governance culture, at least in the central government, has come about. It's come about in many state governments, and I'll just relate to that a little later. I don't think any ministry now holds up clearances. Our FIPB board meets once a month or even more, and almost on a current basis, every investment decision is cleared. People don't have to wait for years and years before they get their clearances. It's done now within days. Environmental clearances, which used to be piled up, the files used to travel, whichever was the home constituency of the minister, I think are now being very expeditiously dealt with. The Prime Minister personally takes a review of the stalled projects. And there's a fair amount of speed in now expediting those stalled projects. We requested the World Bank to start rating our states, because ever since the government took over, there used to be a lot of talk on cooperative federalism. I had added another dimension to this debate, that India is also competitive federalism. And therefore, let there be a competition between the states as to who can attract investors the most. And I think this has worked. The World Bank recently rated our states, and we pleasantly found that the 3 tribal states of Orissa, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, had moved to the first 6 positions. And that's where the natural resources are, that's where investment can do us a lot of good. And those are the governments which have now tried to really move up 10 and 15 places up that ladder and attract investment. Now, even governments which were erstwhile considered to be not very friendly to business have realized this. It's no secret that a government like Andhra Pradesh or Telangana or Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, these were traditionally business-friendly governments. But then West Bengal had to join the bandwagon. Rajasthan next month organizes a global investor meet. Tamil Nadu has just done it. West Bengal had a very successful global investor meet. And after initially squandering a couple of months or almost a year, I think Bengal also learned that they need to promote businesses, and now I see a significant change in attitude. A state like Kerala, where the left had its influence, one of the 2 states, Bengal and Kerala, at least on infrastructural projects, on port-based economy, they've now started taking some positive movement further, which I think is a positive step itself. The empowerment of the states through the Finance Commission, I think, is resulting in actual expenditure of money, both for poverty alleviation as also for infrastructure, so a lot more resource as far as the states are concerned. The deregulation of oil and diesel prices, and we've meticulously stood by the script that every fortnight the oil companies decide their price, de-link it from politics, and fortunately, since we have a very friendly regime at the moment in terms of oil prices, we've been able to so far live up to that script quite well. Rationalization of subsidies. Of course, there will be subsidies which will have to be given to the economically weaker segments. But that rationalization is a great reform. It's an unsung reform which has taken place in the last several months. So you have oil prices, you have diesel prices linked to the market, you have the entire LPG which has been linked to the direct benefit transfer. We've been almost able to save 30% of our expenditure on that. We are now trying to deal with the Supreme Court interim order in the Aadhaar case. and see if other government payments and subsidies could be rationalized with that. And the best evidence of this is in those part of the social security measures, the financial inclusion accounts that we opened up, 180 million, we started with 78% as zero balance accounts. Today it's come down to less than 40%. And by the end of the year, I hope it will be somewhere in its 20s. And that's a result of these large governmental payments or support payments which are going into these accounts so that even the weaker section are able to operate those accounts itself. I think we struggled, and a large part of the tenure of the previous government was wasted in how natural resources are to be allocated. There was a very easy answer: you go by the market mechanism rather than go by individual discretions, because discretions will mean some improprieties take place which then impact on the investment environment, which indeed it did. The spectrum did, the coal auctions did. And now we've had a very cleaner system of allocation of natural resources. In a large number of minerals, we have been able to transfer the benefit of what we get entirely to those states. So that again goes to the benefits of the tribal states, because they were the mineral-rich states as far as India is concerned. One of our main problems of credibility related to the taxation issues. As far as the taxation issues are concerned, a lot needed to be done at our end. And therefore, in terms of direct taxes, we'd lost credibility with the world. The department had come out with some exaggerated demands in many cases. And after assessing that in the very first month, I had repeatedly said that this kind of aggressive taxation does us no good. It doesn't bring us taxes. Because we are a society governed by a rule of law, some judicial authority would stop that unfair taxation. So it hasn't brought us a single rupee in terms of taxes, but it brought us a bad name. And therefore, for anybody in government, it would be a very serious challenge where assessment orders have been passed, can only be set aside by a judicial process and not by an executive decision. And therefore, to resolve each one of those issues is probably one of the toughest challenges that I've faced. And I'm fairly satisfied by one, each one of those issues is now being put to rest. Most of them have been put to rest. I have 2 or 3 cases still pending. And therefore, I'm quite sure over the next few months, either by a judicial process or by some executive process wherever possible, we are keeping all options open in putting those issues to rest. I think the fears of retroactive taxation, by taking a policy decision not to use that power of the government, not to issue any new notices under those laws which were enacted, I think by and large have been put to rest. Our rates were too high. 30% as corporate tax, surcharges used to make it 34.6%. Then exemptions used to bring it down, the actual collection, to about 22-23%. And a lot of exemptions were also a matter of discretion. So I've announced in the last year's budget policy statement that starting 16-17 budget, I will gradually start bringing this figure down to 25% flat corporate tax, and probably put most of these exemptions, except those which encourage individual savings, to an end. Therefore, over the next 4 years, this entire rate would come down to 25%, and I'll be removing each one of those exemptions one by one. I'm shortly going to notify all the exemptions which are going to be rationalized this very year itself. On indirect taxation, there's a huge complaint of the business and the trading community. It leads to evasion. And therefore, the previous government's initiative on the goods and services tax is what I've carried forward. The states are all on board. They are all in agreement. But and parliamentary figure also is in support. We need a 2/3 majority in parliament. The Lok Sabha has cleared it. Even in the Rajya Sabha, we have the numbers on our side. But by sheer disturbances, the Congress party decided not to allow it. I think this was more or less a political positioning rather than a serious ideological opposition, because Dr. Manmohan Singh's government itself had initiated the idea of the goods and services tax. On social sector, I think it has moved further from merely those pre-election gifts that used to be given to the electorate. The connectivity to the bank accounts, I think, has been a very successful program. The insurance and the pension schemes that we've started for the weaker sections has been a very successful program. And I think this initiative, which has not been much talked about in the media, the Mudra initiative, is eventually intended to target 6 crore families in India. That's almost 25% of India, the weakest sections. As against the money lenders at very high rates of interest, these people now will get finance from the banks itself for self-employment process. And in the last 2 to 3 months, already the target this year is about 1.75 to 2 crores. And by the time I left India, we'd already reached about 58 lakhs this year. People who are being, so this is the unfunded section being funded. So people in slums, people in villages, weaker sections, minorities, scheduled caste, those who have no resource, without a security can get these monies, and the recovery rate of the banks is almost 99% in these cases. Now, interest rates I mentioned to you have come down. How have we used this falling oil prices regime? A large part of the benefit we gave to the consumers, but some part has been diverted towards infrastructural funding. And that we've been able to use to actually give a kickstart back to the highway program and the rural roads. So these are 2 programs which have started quite successfully. They were almost stalled for the last 3-4 years. It's helped us a lot. Banking was another sector which was facing serious challenges, particularly because of high NPAs. So the entire banking package of more professional managements, more professional boards, arm's length distancing from the government, bringing down government equity, recapitalization of those banks, and then addressing the 3 stressed sectors. Steel we've addressed. Power, particularly the state of health of 8 discoms in India is a cause of worry, is something which is work in progress. And highways infrastructure, substantially we have addressed that, as a result of which the banking sector will soon start showing some improvement. What is our roadmap for the coming months? Of course, GST will be a top priority. My bankruptcy code is almost ready. Hopefully, I'll take it to Parliament in the winter session. There are a large number of other legislative reforms which are required. I don't see much of a problem in their passage. A lot of decisions have to be taken at the executive level. What are the challenges? I think one important challenge, of course, is the global situation itself, because all this is being done in the midst of a global adversity. And therefore, this is a factor which is well beyond our control. The Congress party's decision to oppose reform measures, I think their ability is only to oppose, their legislative ability is only to oppose a constitution amendment. Now, there's just one-off bill to that effect. The others, they may find it extremely difficult. Indian aspirations are changing, and therefore that opposition has been taken very badly as far as the electorate is concerned. Private sector investment still a little slow. And I hope over the next few months it improves. And lastly, again to repeat your phrase, which I think is a good sign, this revolution of raising expectations. I've always said that India has now reached a situation where India is no longer satisfied with the 6 to 8% growth rate. Most Indians believe, even if the world rates us as one of the fastest growing larger economies, that my normal is 8 plus. It's probably closer to 9. It's probably higher than that. And therefore, I see nothing wrong in the pressures being built on the decision makers that the faster you move, the better it is for the government. And I think being placed in this situation as the opportunity has come. One of the great shoulders the world was relying on, China. World now needs some other additional shoulders to give it the push to the growth rates. I think it's a great opportunity. And if we continue to move in the direction in which we are, I see over the next few years, with a more friendly environment in the world, as far as the economic scenario is concerned, probably our growth rates will move up, our ability to grow will move up, and our ability to fight poverty at least will also improve. Well, thank you very much. That's